Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Self.
Submitted
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. Each episode, my guest and I explore these time loops one loop at a time. This season, I'm trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the first stop at 1963's Season 4, Episode 6, Death Ship. My guest today is Stephen Palmer from the Asian Cinnamon Film Club. How are you doing today?
I'm doing thanks, Mr. Bubba Sterling, with that opening. Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, I'm doing fine. Weather's lovely here in the UK at the moment. It's, as we record, a very pleasant Sunday afternoon. But now you're going to drag me into a place of infinite possibilities, I'm sure.
Yeah, so, this is the first episode on Death Ship. And this is yet another episode where the time loop is mainly just implied. We get to see basically one whole iteration of the time loop, and then we just get to see like a minute of it restarting at the very end, like as the twist happens. I'm curious, what is your background with Twilight Zone?
Yeah, so interesting. Obviously, I'm from England, so I'm 50 years old, right? So I don't remember the Twilight Zone being on television. Certainly not this sort of the OG series. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has been rebooted several times.
Indeed. Now I remember the second reboot in the 80s. That certainly got showing on British TV, and has had the later two. They've been in and around, but I remember watching it. The odd episode here and there on late night British TV. I mean, I'm not going to go into how British TV works, but let's just put it this way: growing up, we didn't have as many channels as you, so lots of these shows didn't get replayed. There's also the issue that what you might call half an hour or an hour of TV is very different to what it is in the UK. We have whole channels without advertisements. And obviously there'd be a lot of editing the Twilight Zone, the original series, because there's quite a lot of sort of baked in advertising as well. However, over the years, some of these episodes are classic, and they're classic for a reason, and they're referenced in other media. And just over the years, I've picked up video cassettes, DVDs, and more recently this wonderful collection of restored Blu-rays, which are just amazing. So it's sort of something that I was always aware of, but more recently I've really tried to sort of dive deep. And when Elwood pointed me saying, "Hey, Bubba's doing a show involving the Twilight Zone," I said, "Yes, I'd love to come and talk about that."
Yeah, and I know, I picked 3 episodes from the original run, and none of them are considered, any of the major classic ones. But personally, I enjoyed all 3 of them. I've watched all 3 of them myself already as we're recording this, which, taking a peek behind the curtain, this is actually the first one that I'm recording, even though it's not the first one that airs. But yeah, and this, Death Ship is from season 4, and this is one of the 1-hour episodes.
Yeah.
Because the first 3 seasons were all half-hour episodes.
That's right. And quite often when you come, someone does a top 10 or a top 25, it's very rare anyone picks anything from season 4, because of, the ostensible 1-hour time zone. Also, it had effectively been cancelled. They hadn't found a sponsor, and it was all pulled back together very quickly. Sterling was busy doing other things. One of the other main writers was extraordinarily ill, and this episode's written by Robert Matheson, isn't it?
Yeah.
who had written a lot for the Twilight Zone before, but this was the first time he went back to the well to one of his previous short stories and adapted it because they were desperate for material. However, I do think season 4 is sometimes a bit maligned. They're just different. The pacing is different, and I'm not sure this particular story would work so well in the sort of standard 20-25 minute episode structure.
Yeah, doing a bit of research for this episode, I did listen to I think 2 or 3 different Twilight Zone podcasts that covered every episode, and
Mm.
there was some differing opinions on this episode. I think there was one of them that didn't really care for it and gave it a mostly below average rating, but I think the other 2 that I listened to actually did enjoy it and thought that it was up there with some of the better 1 hour episodes.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's definitely one of the better episodes from this season. It's got a great cast, a great idea, and I think has some of the fourth season episodes do feel stretched out. They do feel like we were having to add an extra 15 minutes here and a bit over explain maybe. But this one reaches the end, and it's only at the end we really, the twist comes in. I guess we do spoilers, don't we? They're in a time loop.
Well, I mean, the title itself, Death Ship, it kind of, tells you. I mean, it doesn't tell you a lot, but it gives you a pretty big clue as to what's going on in the episode. And I guess we haven't described the episode for people who might not have seen it. This is one of the hour-long episodes, and it is Jack Klugman is a spaceship captain, and he's got 2 other crewmates, and they discover they're looking for, I guess, resources on other planets, and they find something on a planet, and it turns out to be a crashed ship, which turns out to be their ship, with the 3 of them dead in the ship. And they spend the majority of the hour trying to decide between each other whether or not it's actually them, whether it's from the future or a potential future, whether it's a hallucination. And then at the very end, they discover that they are already dead, and they're basically in a purgatory where they're reliving this crash over and over because the captain is so much in denial that he takes the other 2 crewmates along with him in his denial of the afterlife.
Yeah, and if the makers of Lost hadn't seen this episode, I am also a Dutchman. It's like you want to hear the story of Lost, but in 50 minutes, this is the one for you. We have people trapped in purgatory, occasionally revisiting lives that they may no longer have. Yeah, I mean it's a very it's set in the far off future of 1997, a future where they've predicted overpopulation of Earth. There's lots of interesting ideas just thrown away like that, which add to the enjoyment for me of this one. But at the same time, it's an incredibly retro 1997,
Yeah,
including. Yeah, the spaceships from Forbidden Planet, right?
right. Yeah, the spaceship, and I don't think they fully reused the costumes from Forbidden Planet, but they did reuse the emblem, which I do want to take a moment because even though we're talking about the entire hour of this time loop, I do like to keep at least a little bit to the spirit of like the minute by minute podcasts, which helped inspire this, and take at least a little bit of time to point out some of the little details that you notice whenever you're looking at it closely. And one of those things that I did notice was that emblem, which was also from Forbidden Planet, and it was reused on a few other sci-fi programs over the years back at the time, and it kind of looks like the number 6, but it's a comet. It's supposed to resemble a comet, and then it also has like a ring around it, like a horizontal ring around it, which I think it's a fun, nice little, it really helps give the idea of space to it, but it's also very simple. Did you notice that
I hadn't
emblem?
noticed. I hadn't. I mean, I've seen Forbidden Planet, and I recognise the spaceship, and certainly every bit of research you do on it, that's the first thing they bring up. But I hadn't noticed that the use of that emblem in it. And you're right. There's a kind of a beautiful simplicity about it, isn't there? That it just tells you everything you need to know about what they're doing. Exploration in space.
Mhm. And I think, I'm not too familiar with the majority of the cast other than Jack Klugman, who plays the captain. And I think for most people listening to this, he would be the one person that people are most likely to recognize. He was from The Odd Couple, and he had the biggest career out of any of the other cast in this, and he also did, I think, three other Twilight Zone episodes. Uh,
He did a couple of really great ones as well. Interestingly, Klugman didn't like this episode. He didn't like the character he played, which I thought was interesting. Um,
well, he is a very abrasive character,
is,
and
is, is he a method actor? Or was he a method actor? And we know him here in the UK, obviously, as Quincy. So
yeah,
it would, a very familiar face from a sort of certain period of American television that was heavily rotated over here. But yeah, he's great. I didn't recognise the other two guys at all. That sometimes on the quite often when you watch Twilight Zone episodes, you say, oh, I recognise that famous person. Or those faces look familiar from other shows I might have seen around the time, but those two I didn't. But I'm sure they've got a storied history.
yeah. I wasn't familiar with them either, but I do want to talk a little bit about Jack Klugman's character because he is, as we're told, especially at the ending, he's the one who is basically responsible for all three of them being trapped in this time loop, and I think his personality shows pretty early, even in like some of the little things, um, like after they land and Mason is checking the atmosphere to see whether it's breathable without helmets, and he walks away, and then Klugman goes up, and then he like double checks a couple of the instruments, just because everything has to be his way, and if it's not his way, then it's wrong.
What we would call nowadays a bit of a control freak.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm never too sure if this is a military mission or not. I mean, they call he's captain, isn't he? I think he's the only
Yeah.
rank that's announced. But we do learn, that in the military, the chain of command and all that are very important. But I never got the sense. I didn't get the sense here that this was a particularly military mission.
Well, the ID card that we do see whenever Mason
Yes.
pulls out the ID card from his pocket and checks it with his own, it says Interplanetary Administration Rocket Bureau. So
Yeah.
it's not explicitly military. It does it does seem governmental,
Mm,
kind of like future NASA.
yeah. Yeah, I was getting, I can sort of bring it to a British. I was getting a sort of a bit of a Dan Dare feel of the whole thing. That this was in a future where maybe the world's acting together, and I don't know, intergovernmental, partly private. I don't know, but the point is that there's three men on this ship. God knows how long they've been out there, and he is very rigid and very controlling of the other two. But there is a suggestion that he's gotten worse recently. The other two sort of have a little conversation while he's somehow not listening in that little room. But what's gotten into him? Why is he being so extra annoying at the moment? So I don't, and again, I don't know I'm not even sure. Is this the first route round in the time loop? I don't know. I'm going to
Yeah,
assume it is.
I don't think so. And I was gonna, bring that up
Mm,
later, but we can go ahead and talk about it now. This they are in a time loop, and like you said, this might not be the first time through. This is just the first time we see it. If you had to like put a number on it, how many times do you think that they've been through this afterlife mission at this point?
From the way, so whilst we're in this early part of the episode, it's hard to tell. But the exasperation in their voices at the end makes me think there's been a lot. Just let us die. Which isn't something I think someone would come through after two or three route. There could have been thousands. There could have been an infinite number of repetitions.
Personally, I think it hasn't been that many.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe only been maybe like a dozen. I mean, I guess the the loop itself doesn't take that much time in real time. There's not like a lot of time jumps in
Mm,
this. So, the episode takes an hour, and I would guess that, we see maybe just a few hours or like maybe the course of a day or so um, in the character's time. Does that
mm.
sound about right?
If that even, yeah, just a couple of hours. They spot it, they land, they walk around a bit, they come back,
And
they
they,
take off. repeat,
yeah, and
repeats
then
and
they land
rinse.
again.
Yeah.
Which they're,
Um,
even though we're only seeing one iteration of this time loop, there is a lot of repetition in here,
mm.
and a lot of that comes from Klugman. But I'm derailing myself already. Getting back to the question that I just asked, I I think it hasn't been that long because we do see in Carter's vision that his wife, he sees the telegram saying that they've died and his wife's mourning clothes. And he doesn't see his wife because his wife is still alive. And everybody that they see are people that have died already. And I think because of that, it's only been, it's still only been like a few days or maybe a couple weeks. So I think it hasn't been that long. It's been long enough for the information to get to her that they have died, that they've lost contact with the
I
ship.
see, yeah, I see where yes, because what you're suggesting, he literally has gone back to, yes, okay, yeah, no, I'm willing to be talked into your point of view, mate.
But yeah, and then like I was saying, we do get a lot of repetition because practically everything they do, um, uh, Captain Ross, that's his name. So I keep calling him Jack Klugman, but he he asked them to do it again and again and again, and we see that several times throughout the episode. And not only that, but they do eventually decide to lift off, even though they think that maybe leaving the ship is, or leaving the planet is where they're going to crash. And so they argue with whether or not they're going to leave the planet, and then they get up into space again, and then they survive that, and then Jack Klugman or Captain Ross is like, okay, we survived lifting off again. Now let's go back down to the planet to finish it off, to finish off our original mission. And so we get that repetition of them, going up and then coming back down.
Yeah, see, that's the weird thing because at the beginning, he doesn't want to go down.
Mm.
He's doing anything. So even though he is set up as this sort of by the book um, leader, that there's a chain of command here. We'll do what you do, what I say. I'm in charge of you. I'm in charge of keeping you. He repeats a lot of stuff like that. He doesn't want to go down. Yet when they do go up, that when we first see them go up and they survive and they haven't crashed, he's the one who's dragging them down. He's the one who says, right, we're going back down again, just to prove I'm right. And you just think that's just weird. That's when you realize something's not right. That's when you realize something's not right with him.
Well, even early on, even the first time they go down, he is questioning everything that Mason is saying about it, and then they get down there, and Mason was like, "See, everything that I'm doing it by the book," and then Captain Ross is like, "Yes, but you were on the verge of making a mistake."
Yeah, let me know when I make one. Then, yeah, there's this lovely tension between them, which you would get, time loop or not. 3 people cooped up on a spaceship for what one assumes is years, because this is a long way from home, as Sterling says at the beginning. It's as far away from home as I'll ever be, although he's actually playing double duty with us there, isn't he? But yeah, the relationship between the 3 is interesting because it's like Carter was almost in a dream for the whole thing.
Yeah, he got the impression, he has a lot of times, especially after they see their dead bodies, where he's almost acting like he's stoned. It's like, as soon as they walk out of the spaceship after seeing their dead bodies, he's just like staring at his hands. And like if this was like a stoner comedy, he'd be like, "Whoa, my hands are like."
And he spends a lot of time with his hands on his face, doesn't he? Just touching his face, trying to work out, And there's a whole metaphysical thing about that, about minds and brains and bodies. That again, I wondered whether that's, when I first saw this, that's where I wondered where this was going. And actually, I didn't even consider, when I very first saw this, I'd never even considered that they were in a time loop. I thought this was going to be, I suspected, this isn't the first time the Twilight Zone's gone to this concept of a purgatory. So I was expecting something like that, but yeah, he's really, he acts like, I don't know, like you said, like he's stoned, like maybe he's just out of it, like, oh no, not this again, or his brain's processing things. He's the first to go to visit, shall we call it the afterlife? I don't know. This version of the world where only dead people are.
Yeah, in a way, they are basically in this afterlife purgatory already, to where it's almost like the ghost punishment, where they have to keep reliving their deaths over and over, except instead of like reliving the events of their deaths, it's like they're visiting the aftermath of their death over and over, because in this afterlife reality, like the world around them is like they're still visiting the physical reality, but they themselves are like spirits, and they can only interact with other spirits or things that are physically there and not living. So that's why they see their ship, they see their dead bodies, but they don't see anybody else who is still alive. That's why he doesn't see his wife Mary.
Yeah, and they can see each other, of course, which is the other clue. Of course, the only people they see in these alternate, in these visions of their on Earth life is dead people, like you say, and of course they can see themselves and they see their own dead bodies. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we talked about Carter acting stone, but right before that, I think we really get the episode gives us our first hint that something is amiss whenever Mason, after they walk out of the ship, he has this, it's the close-up of his horrified face, and then you hear they add the sound effect of an explosion, and then Captain Ross, barks at him and then snaps him out of it. And that explosion, watching it a second time, that's the hint. That's like him remembering the reality of their actual crash.
Yes, that's very subtle though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like you say, you wouldn't spot that the first time round. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's so great that Ross himself is such a commanding presence. Um, like there's that moment right there where he snaps him out of his memory, and then also Carter is the first one that has the flash of him being where he's supposed to be, like him being back on Earth in spirit form, and then. Um, Again, it's Ross that snaps him out of it. But in that moment, it makes you seem because it's like, he hears Captain Ross and then he flashes and he's back in the spaceship. And it makes it seem like he was having a hallucination or a vision. But then they amp it up whenever it gets to Mason's vision, where Ross physically enters his vision, like he's there physically and they are fighting with each other. And he physically drags him back to the spaceship, to Captain Ross's afterlife, not
Yeah, because
letting him leave.
I remember Ross physically disappears from the ship, from the the reality, which is our point of view,
And
the spaceship.
Yeah,
Mason, sorry, yeah, Mason.
Ross is the
That's
first
right.
one. And that's, it just flashes and then he's
Yeah.
there and then it flashes back. And then they see that Mason is physically missing.
Yeah, and has one of the most heartbreaking little scenes. And again, although they explain what's happened when he comes back, there's some really good acting in that moment. We know something's not right here. We know he basically meets his young daughter and his wife.
Yeah,
But things
and
are
watching
just
it the first time again, and this is an episode like most time loops that benefits on rewatching, because at first you're like, that's he's acting awfully over the top just seeing his daughter. Like how long have they been gone? Maybe a few weeks, a couple months, but he's acting like he hasn't seen her in years, and then it's not until afterwards, after Ross snaps him out of it and then shows him the news article that he still has in his pockets, showing that they were dead, and then that's whenever it makes so much more sense. That's why he's so emotional, because he's seeing them after realizing that after thinking that they were dead.
so it's so powerful. Although does counter they Mason and Carter have a bit of a go at Ross by saying, "Oh, the reason he's got no one, he's got no one to go back for." But of course, neither has Mason. Yeah, Mason's there probably because he doesn't have a wife and child waiting for him at home. Maybe obviously the place he wants to go back to, is to be with his wife and daughter in the afterlife. But yeah, that is, I did find that a bit weird that the suggestion isn't there that because Ross doesn't have any of these visions, and they outright say to him, you've got no one waiting for you, and that's why he doesn't want to go into purgatory. That's why he doesn't want to go to past this purgatory. At least here he has those two. Later on, he'll have nobody, and he'll be alone. And yeah, I did find a little disconnect in the story there, but that's probably because none of these flashbacks were in the original story, and they're additions for this episode. So maybe we'll allow a little bit of clunkiness.
Yeah, I mean, you can also argue that it has to do with them being confused about that, or them confusing the afterlife with the physical life, because Carter still has his wife Mary at home alive waiting for him, whereas Mason has his wife and daughter waiting for him in the afterlife. So I think you could maybe stretch it a little bit to say that they're getting confused because they part of them knows that they're dead, but part of them doesn't know that they're dead.
Yeah, and they're at different points of understanding, aren't they? At that point, but, we haven't even come across Ross's initial explanation of telepathic aliens yet. So yeah, it's all still confusing for them.
Captain does go through several different explanations as to why they're seeing their own crashed ship, and I guess let's go with the first one that he does. The theory of circumnavigating time is how they explain it, to where they're traveling faster than light or near the speed of light. They don't really explain how they're traveling exactly, but that causes them to potentially go forward in time or backwards in time. And so they're seeing a potential future. What do you think about that explanation?
And he sort of says, they told us about this back in the academy or something, doesn't he? He's
Yeah.
this, but it's only a theory. I mean, that's a sci-fi classic, isn't it? The slingshotting round the sun, going faster than light, could potentially send you.
Basically, in my wheelhouse, going back to the ending of Superman the movie, where
Yeah,
Superman flies around the world so fast that he turns back time or goes back in time.
absolutely. The science fiction, superhero comics are full of, and indeed Superman the movie is full of ideas like this, and it sounds perfectly reasonable. Yeah, remember this is early '60s, right? This is the birth of a
The
sort of a new scientific
theory of
reality.
relativity.
Exactly, yeah. Einstein's writing at this time. This is real. So that makes sense. That sounds like a perfectly good and rational explanation. For men of science, you assume them out. They are scientists. They're on a scientific expedition to find somewhere for the human race to live. So that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. It's a 3 out of 5 on the believability meter.
Yeah, I think in the '60s that was probably like 4.5 out of 5. But...
Indeed.
And then his next one is that there is aliens, and they are making them hallucinate and see what the aliens want them to see, which I think even back then they realized that explanation was intended to be more of a stretch.
I think so, although I do believe that he's grabbed out of some previous sci-fi writing, and that's that again. It's a trope, but they've never come across aliens before, so that's been quite clear to us.
And that is something that was a a storyline in various Star Trek episodes where there are aliens that do that. I mean, I think the most famous one is basically where Jean-Luc Picard basically lives out an entire lifetime in one episode, and for him it's just a few hours, but in his mind he lived this entire life because of this image, this basically hallucination given to him by this alien artifact.
Yeah, I have memories of that. So this, yeah, this is high concept sci-fi stuff. But the fact that they haven't come across any aliens, they've come across no alien life. They've made a big thing of this, and in fact, Ross berates the other two for being, I forget what he calls them, but like alien hunters or something. He has a go at them about that. For him to come up with this idea, yeah, for him to come up with this idea just reeks of desperation. But again, it's a perfectly valid sci-fi trope.
And it also echoes, the stereotypical sitcom character. It's like whenever somebody says an idea, and then the aggressive boss character is like, "That's a stupid idea," and then he repeats the idea himself and says, "This is a brilliant idea."
Because now it's coming out of my mouth.
Yes.
But yeah. Yeah, that was the least successful to me. But again, it's perfectly valid in the context of this show and this story in particular. What's his third explanation?
I think he just has those two. I don't think.
Oh, that's right, because that's what encourages. Look, let's get off the planet. If we get off, we don't crash. Then we've shown it's just a vision that's been put into our minds.
Right.
And that's what drives him to say, haha, now we've got them. Let's go back down again. And again, I don't really understand what going back down again. The frustration is there a version of the time loop where they decide, actually, let's just go, let's go back home, and the fact that they can't, I guess that's why they're trapped. That someone's always going to force them back down again, but we just haven't seen enough iterations of the loop yet.
Yeah, because we do just see the one, and with a lot of these purgatory style time loops, the reason that they don't show the repetition is because the assumption is that each repetition is exactly the same, that they are going through this in exactly the same way each time, because in a way it's a punishment.
They're doing it, yeah. They're doing it on rails, aren't they? This is like a ghost train or something. Ghost ship,
like the Flying Dutchman. I think I don't remember if it's this episode or the Judgment Night episode where the ending narration explicitly mentions the Flying Dutchman.
So at the end of this one, yeah, Sterling calls it like a latter-day Flying Dutchman. But I'm pretty certain Judgment Night also references a Flying Dutchman as well. But Sterling definitely calls it out at the end of this episode. And that's a thing. That's something that people will have known about. The story of the Flying Dutchman, even before Pirates of the Caribbean was a well-known story. That has many stories of sailors and the like, and mysterious things that they've seen. That Flying Dutchman, the ship cursed to continue on its journey because of its damned captain.
And that's also the other reason why I did, just slightly tweak the format that I've done in previous ones, where even if a time loop was like 1 second long, like I did with the montage of slaps, even though at the end of the episode we do get like a minute of a repetition, like another time loop, I decided not to give that its own episode because it is an exact repetition, and it doesn't do anything new.
Not at all. So they go back up. Ross then says we're coming back down again. They have a little bit of a fight.
Yeah, it's the episode's way of having a fake out. It's like, the episode. I think the episode does progress very well in, especially in a first time viewing, kind of following along with the characters. It's like the episode will present a potential possibility, and then you go along with it, and then they cut the legs out from under it, and it's like, no, it's not this, but maybe it's this, and then no, it's not this either. Like, maybe it's aliens. No, it's not aliens. Okay, maybe they'll crash whenever they launch. No, they didn't crash when they launch. Maybe they'll crash when they try to land again. No, they didn't crash when they land again. And it's just this constant giving this a potential explanation and then just completely getting rid of that explanation, like explaining that explanation away.
Until Mason can take it no more, and he's worked it out. Mm-hmm. Or he's worked out, as we're assuming he's right. It makes sense in the information that we have available to us.
Yeah.
But
especially whenever it does get to it does start over, because at that point he's broken through to Captain Ross's denial. It's like he's given him so much evidence that Captain Ross is no longer able to stick with his denial, and so he brings on this extra level of denial to where he just brings them all back to the beginning.
That's not that we're dead. we're dead. Why won't you let us die?
And one thing that I really love in that speech is Mason calls Captain Ross Paul.
Yes.
Like he goes for the first name that he stopped. It's less informal, or it's less formal, and it's more personal. Like he's reaching out to him as another human being, and by calling him by his first name, by calling him Paul and not Captain Ross. And that's such a really great and also a subtle moment too. And this episode's full of those little subtle moments that I've definitely noticed more as I watched it I didn't watch it a ton of times. I think I watched it just 2 or 3 times.
I mean, yeah, there's it's constant quality writing and acting in it. It's not the most complicated. I don't, you pointed out something to me, that explosion. I hadn't caught that in the couple of times that I watched it, but there isn't a lot of complexity here, but there's a lot of just well written stuff, and there's a lot of lovely little moments that reward a second watch, a third watch, maybe. Yeah, and like I said at the beginning, this is one of these hour-long episodes of the Twilight Zone that most people don't think of as superior. But I just think I just think this one just takes its time and just paints its story really well.
Yeah, and I'm really um, excited to revisit this episode again with another guest.
Mm.
By putting myself in the time loop, as it were. Since since we don't get the repetition within the episode, and I'm really curious to see how this season goes with these early episodes, doing things just a little bit different.
Trapped in your own time loop.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just hope you don't feel like it's purgatory and that it's an enjoyable experience for you.
But I think that's about the end of my notes for this episode. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about this episode, or about Zone in general, or about time loops in general?
Just there are just some interesting this sort of the history of the Twilight Zone, and this episode in particular interests me because it just shows it's just a thing of it's a product of its time. We've already spoke about the reusing props from Forbidden Planet. They happen to be lying around where they're making they're making this season. There's some attempts at some quite clever stuff. Like when we see the dead bodies and we're seeing the live versions of the characters in the same shot. There's one horrible little jump shot that takes you out of it a bit. But I just think it's incredibly well done when you think this is a weekly TV show. It's done on a real budget. This is a season which shouldn't have existed. It was a mid-season replacement of a mid-season replacement. And yes, is it as fancy as some of the other space-based episodes? It's no, but I just think this is one. I don't really care about the quality of the props. There's another thing, like with the spaceship, you see the spaceship in its long shot and it's in the middle of a desert. When you're up close to it, it's in the middle of a jungle. There's all these sort of things which in a lesser show, I would pick to pieces. But this one, it's so well performed and I don't know, it's just one of those episodes that's just not perfect. I don't think it's in my top 20 Twilight Zone episodes, but it's just so well done that I don't care that it's got little nitpicky things that you could shred it with.
And over the course of the entire 1 hour episode, it's primarily just these three actors. We do get, a couple other actors in the two lieutenants' visions, but for the most part, it's just these three. And I think that, Carter doesn't really get to do a whole lot because he seems like he spends about half the episode just kind of looking at his hands and being off in the background. But I do think that Captain Ross and Lieutenant Mason really carry the episode, and they carry it well.
They do. Also on the Blu-rays, and also actually in the UK, in one of the Radio 4 did a I have to know they did a radio play version of this, and on the Blu-rays there's some other an American radio play version of it. It stands up in that as well because it's such a good acting piece. It's not reliant on gimmicks. So much sci-fi. I know not a lot of Twilight Zone wasn't sci-fi, but sci-fi can rely on gimmicks, can rely on special effects, can rely on alien costumes. But the best sci-fi to me just relies on ideas. And I just think this is just a really well-written episode that actually exists in other formats as well, just as well.
Yeah, it's been many, many years since I listened to the audio dramas, but a long time ago, I'd say over 10 years ago, I was on a big audiobook kick, and I would get various audiobooks from the library and listen to them in the car. And I went through that they had several seasons of the Twilight Zone audio dramas, and I
Mm.
listened to a whole bunch of them, and they're all really great. They're worth seeking out. I'm glad to hear that they are included in at least some of the home video releases.
The most recent, sort of, there's a recent-ish Blu-ray set that they look amazing. Obviously, because they were done on film, they've been quite beautifully remastered. I was watching an episode. I was watching a version of it on YouTube, which clearly has come off some VHS or something like that, and it looks terrible. The Blu-rays look like it was filmed yesterday, but they're full of wonderful extra features, commentaries, interviews with actors, and the audio plays as well. And yeah, it just shows you how almost eternal this show is, and it deserves its place in the I don't know, just sort of a golden age of TV place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm glad that I chose to revisit the Twilight Zone, even though they might not be the top episodes. The three episodes that I'm picking are probably like somewhere in the middle. I don't think any of them are any of the bad episodes, but they're not the best episodes. But even the middle of the road Twilight Zone episodes are still great TV and still hold up as good entertainment. And this episode especially.
They're 60 years old and they still hold up. I mean, I think that tells you everything, doesn't it?
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today and being trapped in the Twilight Zone with me for this episode. Why don't you go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you online?
Okie dokie. Right. So, oh god, this could be a long one. I'll just do the highlights. No, mostly you'll find me on the as the co-host of the Asian Cinema Film Club, where me and Elwood Jones sort of bi-weekly take turns to pick a movie from Southeast Asia. So whether that be China or Hong Kong or Japan or Thailand or Taiwan or other places as well we've been to. We are quite different characters. Elwood is into his sort of genre and cult cinema. So from Elwood, you'll get him picking, on the whole, kung fu movies, martial arts movies, kaiju movies, that kind of thing. And for me, I'm more into the sort of like the art house. And so certainly in the early days, it was an exploration of each other's tastes within Asian cinema. However, what we found out over the last 4 or 5 years, our tastes maybe are swapping over, and we find each other picking films that we would have thought traditionally the other one had done. So yes, we're Asian Cinema Film Club. It's on all the places you can get podcasts. There's a Facebook group there's quite a lot of conversation going on there. I also produce and sometimes appear on another podcast called In Their Own League, which is about female filmmakers, not just directors, but editors and all those other people behind the camera. Basically, I produce and occasionally appear on their podcast, but it's a great website as well, especially if you're interested in the power of the female. That's a horrible thing to say, but I hope you know what I mean. I think that'll do for now, mate. I pop up all over the place.
Yeah, so, I'm Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstitesandmovienights.com. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. I also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, where you can join and talk about episodes as they come out or about time loops in general. And until next time, I will still be here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone. Picture of the crew of the spaceship E-89. Captain Ross, Lieutenant Mason, Lieutenant Carter. three men who have just reached a place which is as far from home as they will ever be. Three men who in a matter of minutes will be plunged into the darkest nightmare reaches of the Twilight Zone.